My name is Sam Panarella. The recording is in progress. I am the director of the Max Baucus Institute, and also hello to all of our hundreds or thousands of people on Zoom. Thank you for joining us. I have the great pleasure of kicking us off tonight, introducing Ambassador Baucus and of course, Secretary Kerry. Before I do though, a couple of pieces of business I need to or want to cover, must cover. First of all, a huge thank you to Stockman Bank, the sponsor of our speaker series. Dave Ashby's in the room. Thank you, Stockman Bank. I also would be remiss without giving a shout out to several people in the room, or groups of people, that I'm gonna name check because it's that important. First of all, we have 4 students and their teacher from Sentinel High School. These 4 students were the 2022 Academic World Quest Montana champions, heading to DC next week to compete nationally. They're here with us. You're gonna hear from one of them later in the evening. We also have a bunch, I think 15 students from St. Ignatius High School here to participate in the event. Really excited to have them here. Also in the room, you're with royalty, are Baucus Leaders, Baucus Climate Scholars, and Baucus Leaders Montana, all of our various leadership programs. 15 or 20 of them are here in the room, and we're so happy they're here. Let me say a few words about the Baucus Institute before I introduce Ambassador Baucus. I think that the United States is in danger of becoming an island nation, or maybe it's better to say a nation of islands. So political islands, social islands, economic islands, ideological islands. If you can name an island, we probably got it, right, in the United States. And even worse, membership of an island is often defined more about who's not on the island than who is on the island. We're fractured, we're riven, we feel disconnected from one another. This is the America in 2022 that at least I see. So what does the Baucus Institute do? What's our business? How do we make our money, or at least spend the money we get? We build bridges. We're in the bridge building business. That's what we do at the Institute. We believe that these islands must start to be connected, and not just domestically, but internationally. So that's what we do. We build bridges. Tonight, we're going to be talking about climate change, probably the most pressing issue, I believe, that is facing the entire world. Obviously, we have the great pleasure of having Secretary Kerry here and Ambassador Baucus to talk about that. Those are some of the bridges we're trying to build when we send students to DC to intern with senators. And by the way, to be clear, not just Democratic senators, but also Republican senators. So we have an intern with Senator Schumer this summer, but also with Senator Grassley, with Senator Gillibrand, but also with Senator Crapo. These are bridges we have to build. We have to start talking to one another. We must start talking to one another. We must start recreating those connections, rebuilding those bridges. That's what we do at the Baucus Institute. Those bridges are looking kind of lousy right now, a little run down. The infrastructure is a little weak, but we're not giving up on those bridges. In fact, every single day I wake up, and I know Max wakes up, and I bet Secretary Kerry wakes up thinking about how to rebuild those bridges. That's what we're up to at the Baucus Institute. We have been the recipient in the last few weeks, you may have seen the news release, of some wonderful gifts to help us with our bridge building. The Gates Foundation recently gave us $500,000 specifically to create access for underrepresented communities in Montana to our programs, most specifically to tribal communities, to get the access to go to Washington, D.C., to go to China, to study comparative law and policy. The Hewlett Foundation recently gave us a $300,000 gift to build our capacity, again, for our bridge building. We're incredibly fortunate to have those gifts. But none of that matters, again, without the students, the young people. Montana has the best young people, right? We want to give them the opportunities to go make a difference in the world. I, again, have the great pleasure of introducing Ambassador Baucus. Usually I go through his resume, which is quite long and distinguished. I'm going to attenuate that a little bit tonight. Max is Montana's senator. Can we all agree on that? Okay, we can all agree on that. All right. He's, in my opinion, our greatest public servant and continues to be. I'm going to tell you just a quick story to introduce Max. One of the things I've been doing for a long time, not lately because of the pandemic, but before that, is bringing a lot of students, Montana students, to China to study comparative law and policy. So we land in China, we spend several weeks studying comparative climate change, for example, or water law or business law. And the students do great. China's a whole new world for them. The food is strange, although delicious. And we're there for a few weeks. And when Max and Mel were in China as ambassador to China from the United States, every year toward the end of the trip, we would visit Beijing, and Max and Mel would invite all of us over to the residence and do what? Put on a Montana barbecue. You have never seen kids eat as many hamburgers and hot dogs as these poor Montana kids did after 3 weeks of not having hamburgers and hot dogs. It was incredible. But it's a testament. They were so welcoming, and the students felt incredibly special and really enjoyed it. But that's who they are. I mean, they're Montanans, right? They're welcoming, kind people. So without further ado, Max Baucus.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. I'm going to be very short because we're here to listen to Secretary Kerry. I can't resist, though, to mention that we did those barbecues back then. You've never seen so many Grizz shirts in your life. It rivals Washington Stadium in a football game. We had Grizz all over. It was wonderful. Mel and I are very honored to be hosting this event tonight. We're working hard on the Institute. We're growing, a lot more students, raising some funds. I want really to put the Institute on the map in Montana and even beyond. And we just thank everyone here for participating. Thank Sam, big team here. We thank Denise over here, Greg over the side, Lily, MBW in the back there. We got an ACES team. Senator Bodner and Chelsea, thank you so much for all that you do for this community. Let's give a round of applause to Senator Bodner. Okay, John Kerry. This is really kind of cool. Secretary Kerry is our first special presidential envoy for climate. First time ever. He has that job. Second, he's on the National Security Council. As you know, that is really the agency that sets most policy for our country. Now, John will tell you when he's over in the State Department, he kind of chafed at NSC, but now he's on the NSC Council, and he's just making the decisions over there. It's wonderful that he is on that council, setting a policy for our country. Senator Kerry was my colleague in the Congress, serving as a senator for many years, representing Massachusetts, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. A long time working with John. He was chairing that committee. Secretary Kerry, under President Obama, served a good number of years, and during that tenure, he helped put together the successful negotiation of the Iran nuclear accord, and of course, the Paris Climate Agreement. He's a Navy veteran, decorated, author of several books, and I just might say at the end that I don't know anybody who is more dedicated and works harder for our country than John Kerry. When Mel and I in Beijing, John would come over several times, and man, oh man, he just worked constantly. He worked there in the country. He was on the phone working on the Iran deal. He was constantly working. I don't know anybody that works as hard as he. So we're lucky to have him working for us on climate, because listening to Sam a few minutes ago, if there's any unifier of all these islands, it's climate. We're all in this together, Republicans, Democrats, all our countries. And so it's our hope that we can unify around climate and find some solutions. It's going to be exceedingly difficult, but we have no choice but to work as hard as we can to find some answers here. And we're very lucky tonight to have John Kerry help explain to us what our country is doing, and from his perspective, what the world is doing and what we need to do. John Kerry.
Well, Max, thank you very, very much. I think I have a moment just to sort of share a few opening comments, and then we're going to have a conversation, if I understand it correctly. But let me just say to everybody there, first of all, I wish I could be there in person, and the schedule here We have a very long day tomorrow with the international bank meetings that are taking place here, the development banks, World Bank, European Development Bank, et cetera. And in addition, tomorrow night, we're going to be meeting trying to figure out some financing for climate issues. But let me say thank you to Max. I mean, my turn to say a few words. Max and Mel were a fabulous team in Beijing. And Beijing is not an easy place. And I will tell you that Max did just a superb job of carrying the lessons learned from the Senate, how to be bipartisan, how to reach across the aisle, how to build coalitions. And he did a superb job as our ambassador to a very, very complicated relationship. So I thank him for that. And I thank him also for his leadership as a senator. He was a great senator. He was my chairman on the Finance Committee. And I watched him really dexterously manage the development of Obamacare, which really happened in the Finance Committee. And Max led that brilliantly. It was very, very complicated, difficult piece of legislation. The timing of everything, the moments where you go public with one thing or another. I mean, it's a study, really, it's a great case study in governance. And you all should be, and I know you are, very, very proud of the fact that your senator, Max Baucus, led that effort, and he made a difference for our nation forever. So thank you, Max, for that. On the issue of climate, folks, I take a deep breath because there's some measure of frustration with where we are relative to where we ought to be. And it's inevitable. I mean, we're dealing with a global issue, a global challenge. China is 28 to 30% of all the emissions in the world. We are 10% now. And then beneath us, you have Russia and India, Indonesia, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, South Africa. So our challenge, in my judgment, is to manage those 20 countries that equal 80% of all the emissions. That's the beginning place for me. What is the problem? The problem is emissions. You remember Willie Sutton, the great bank robber? They asked him, why do you rob the banks? He said, because that's where the money is. Well, why do we go to the 20 countries? Because that's where the emissions are. And if we can get those 20 countries to do what's necessary, everything else can change radically and very quickly. The problem is, after Glasgow, we left Glasgow with 65% of those countries of global GDP, the biggest economies in the world, 65% were committed to real plans that can keep the Earth's temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. The problem is that 65% doesn't cut it. We can't keep it to 1.5 degrees if all those countries are not engaged. And right now, China, which is 28 to 30% of all emissions, is increasing its emissions, building coal-fired power plants. In addition, Russia, obviously, which is not even, we can't even contemplate having Russia at the table now, let alone having it act responsibly. But prior to the Ukraine war, Russia was a major problem because of methane and leakage and emissions. And India has a massive coal dependency, and so does Indonesia and so forth. So our challenge now, my friends, is to figure out how we're going to bring the world together. As Max just said, we're all in it together. And I'm delighted to talk to you tonight about sort of what we're planning to do, what the progress is we've made, and obviously answer any of your questions. So Max, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here with you.
Well, it's an honor for us to have you here, John. Thank you very much. Okay, I think Sam's going to ask our first question.
I am. Secretary Kerry, first question, and this is actually for both you and for Ambassador Baucus. And by the way, let me say, these questions are not my questions. These questions came from the Missoula community, the Montana community. First one, share a "this is real" moment you had concerning the climate. Secretary Kerry, can you go first on that one?
Well, there are a lot of them. I think the most recent storms that we've had and floods that we've had, the intensity of the weather in Massachusetts has changed dramatically. We have much more intensive winds, 90 miles per hour, 100 miles per hour on a normal northeaster, which is unusual. Everything is more intense. And we now have great white sharks inhabiting our waters because of the warming of the waters of the Northeast. So those are two very direct, clear impacts as a consequence of the climate changes that are taking place. And there are many more. I mean, I could go through a long list, but those are two very dramatic ones that have had an impact on tourism, an impact on our economy, an impact on our lives.
Thank you. Ambassador Baucus?
Oh, I know. This is very personal. The worst windstorm I've seen in my life in Montana occurred at our place. We live over in Belgrade, Montana, near Bozeman. About a couple of weeks ago, blew shingles off our house. And I've never seen such a violent storm in my life. Now, that's very personal. I admit that, but it was real. It was really real. And it's the point about all climate scientists will tell you, obviously, that there's greater oscillation in highs and lows. There's an increased frequency and highs and lows, and we're going through it.
Thank you. Secretary Kerry, you sit on the National Security Council in your role as the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate. Could you talk a little bit about climate change and national security and the connection between the two?
Well, the connection, I think, is becoming more evident to everybody in our country, though very sadly, one political party in our country, and I'm not here to be partisan, but one political party, as a matter of fact, has decided to make climate a toxic political issue. And so we can't find a vote, not one vote yet, to do something to address the climate crisis in the Congress. And that's a problem. But sitting on the National Security Council only accentuates the understanding of why this is a bipartisan issue. There's no label on these storms. You know, there's no Republican or Democrat sea level rise or wind intensity or flood or fire or mudslide or extreme heat. This is hitting everybody. And the problem in terms of national security is that our military has for years. I mean, when Max and I were in the Senate, the Joint Chiefs of Staff would tell us that climate was a threat multiplier. It has the capacity to change conflict dynamics, to change the relationship of countries to each other. One country may, for instance, govern a river upstream. And as the river begins to dry up, water becomes even more of a contest. And so you may have a war between, Eritrea or Egypt. The challenge to water in the Hindu Kush, in the Mideast, and elsewhere is growing. Extreme heat is growing. And when you have extreme heat, people try to get out of it. And there are now about 5 million people a year moving around the planet because of extreme heat, looking for a place that is better to live. We have about 10 million people a year who die as a result of the quality of air. And that's growing. That's called pollution. Greenhouse gases are pollution, and we shouldn't tolerate it, but we have been. And we're seeing some levels of that pollution grow in certain parts of our country. The fact is that 90%, Max just talked about the gradient changes, the intensity of the wind. 90% of the warming of the planet transfers to the ocean. The ocean is the great sink for carbon dioxide and for heat. That heat is warming the ocean, which increases the moisture, which then goes into the atmosphere and moves around the planet and mixes with the intensity of jet stream and currents. And that is part of what is producing this increased level of flooding, the increased level of our rainstorms, the increased intensity of winds. And the result is that we suffer damage as a result of that. But in certain parts of the world, you have people who go to war over these impacts, fighting for water, fighting for territory. And there are climate refugees in the world today with predictions that if we don't do what we need to do to ameliorate the level of warming, we're going to witness massive refugee migrations. We've seen what happened to Europe during the Syrian war. We see what's happening now with Ukraine. The climate crisis presents the possibility of even greater migration of human beings who are moving away from the intensity heat and looking for a decent place to be able to survive and eat. Many people can't grow food where they are today, where they used to. And the African food basket is literally threatened in ways that people say it could collapse as a place to provide food for a massive number of people on the planet. So that's why there are security issues, because the movement of people, the extreme heat, the intensity of these storms, the damage of it changes food production patterns, changes life patterns, and it could present very, very serious challenges as we go forward, not to mention the challenge of security when you have an intense storm and you have to deploy the National Guard or deploy your emergency rescue teams from all over the country. Look at the fires we're fighting right now in New Mexico. Now it is being presumed by climatologists that we're going to face fires year round. It's not a summer event. It's a year round event. That's a crisis of security. And in addition to that, you have the intensity of some of these storms. Hurricane Harvey dropped more water on Houston, Texas, and Louisiana in 5 days than goes over Niagara Falls in a whole year. And Irma, the storm Irma, provided 185 miles an hour wind for a sustained 24 hours. We've never measured that before, and the damage that comes with it. So you all, taxpayers, we all, taxpayers, spent $265 billion of taxpayer money cleaning up after 3 storms. We've spent trillions, if you add up all the storms of the last 10 years, and it doesn't make sense to be docilely sitting there accepting this damage as a regular event when it doesn't have to be, and there is a cleaner, safer, healthier life for the planet waiting for you when we transition to clean energy as the basis of our power and our transportation and so forth in a country. So that's why it's a security issue.
Very briefly, John, all these tragic catastrophes are somewhat well documented. Why isn't there more cooperation in the Congress between the two parties? What's the NSC trying to do? What's the White House trying to do to knock some sense into some of these folks? Like say the Texas senators. I mean, there's dramatic climate problems in Texas. What are you trying to do? That's one question. When you're thinking about that, I'm sorry. The second one, it gets to security. We want to make sure that we have the technologies, the renewable technologies that make us secure. For example, today, solar panels, they're almost all manufactured in China. Silicon, polysilicon, almost all comes from China. I mean, it seems to me at some point, we got to make sure that we're somewhat, we address the national security problems of manufacturing solar panels in our country.
That is absolutely another big aspect of security challenge, Max. You hit the nail on the head. The fact is that 75% of all the solar panels in the world are made in China. 95% of all the solar panels in the world have some element of Chinese input from the ingots or the wafers. And that's part of the problem that we face today, because there are tariffs, there are sanctions on those because of the Uyghur treatment. And the result is that there are now massive levels of panels stopped up on the docks of China in a crisis augmented by the shutdown for COVID. So we may have a serious supply chain disruption coming at us very shortly and it's preventing us from being able to deploy the level of solar that we need to deploy in order to meet the goals of Glasgow and Paris. So there's really a building storm here, if you will. You're absolutely correct about wanting to break out of that. I was at MIT this morning, where they showcased 5 big new programs they call the Grand Climate Challenge. And several of them have to do with adaptation, several of them have to do with mitigation. But the point is that we're going to have to really, behave like we were in World War II, where we had a Manhattan Project and we were driving forward to make sure that we had the capacity to end the war and win the war. That's what we need to do now, Max, win the war. And this is existential. President Biden has said it's existential. He's gone further than any president in history in putting ideas on the table. But unfortunately, some of our former colleagues in the Senate have decided the same strategy that, Max, you lived through in the last years you were there, when they make nothing happen. And if nothing happens, then they can blame the incumbency president, and it's all about political power. It's really sad, because the United States of America needs to lead the fight on these technologies. I want America to have those technologies. I want us to be the seller to the world. I want us to be, and so does President Biden. And he's trying to get there. And as you know, Max, there's one person who kind of holds the vote that will decide whether or not we can get there. So this is a really unique situation. I don't think you and I lived through a lot of tough votes, and a lot of times where we had to go out and cajole and build a coalition. But during those days, Republicans and Democrats would go out to dinner together. They could talk to each other. They could actually do that with impunity. Today, you get punished if you work with the other side. And a lot of people recoil from sort of the way in which the Senate used to work, to have a Senate that frankly is not working very well at all.
Next question.
Well, yeah, I'm going to go off script. Secretary Kerry, what do we do about that? How is there a fix for that? Is there a way to break through? I mean, I guess maybe I'm asking to give us some hope, or maybe just a dose of reality. How, if at all, can that change in Congress, in our government? What's next? What's the next step?
Sam, I think it changes when people in both parties, citizens. Democracy does not work on autopilot. You have to fight for it. That's been proven again and again. And never has that been more necessary than now. We had an insurrection in the United States of America. A lot of people don't take it very seriously. They think that it was sort of, oh, wow, some people got out of hand or something. But no, that was planned. That was plotted. That was laid out and set out as a strategy to overturn an election. And thank you for Mike Pence, who had the courage to stand up and do what was right in a bipartisan way. But the fact is that we cannot be a country in which we are divided that way. We must find the people who are willing to stand up for the Constitution, which is the oath you take when you take office as a senator or a congressperson. And I hope and pray that the people of our nation will demand seriousness, maturity in the people who are going to represent us. You have to win elections with people who have an agenda that people are willing to adopt. And if you don't, and they come in there with cockamamie, QAnon, and other kinds of agendas, we're in trouble. But if we have people who will go to the ballot box and people who run for office like Max did and others, we can build back the kind of coalition that makes this country work.
John, I got a question. We both spent some time in China. We both helped get President Xi Jinping working with President Obama to reach an agreement on the climate and entered the Paris Accord, and that's fallen apart now. What are, in your judgment, what are some of the carrots and some of the sticks that we could employ? Can it reach more agreement with China on climate?
Well, first of all, Max, we started out a year ago when President Biden came in. He had a conversation with President Xi. we agreed that climate was not a bilateral issue. It's a multilateral, universal issue. We all have a stake in it. So the idea was going to be that we can do climate and we can pursue a track on climate, and we did last year. And ultimately, I mean, I made 2 visits to China in the middle of COVID, landing in an airplane and getting out. It was like a moonscape with all these guys in their full regalia, and you couldn't touch anything, and you got in a bus and you were piped off to a completely isolated place. And we met for 2 days, and 2 days in Tianjin, 2 days in Shanghai, 2 days in London, 2 days and several days in Glasgow. We got an agreement to create a working group to move on methane, to deal with reducing coal consumption faster in China, where it's a real problem because it's no capture of the emissions, it's unabated. That's the biggest single contributor to the warming of the ocean and to the acidification of the ocean and so forth. So we made progress, but now we're simply not in a position to do that because unfortunately the other issues are entering into the equation. And China is not moving on critical issues of economic access, business access, market access, cyber warfare, nuclear, North Korea, South China Sea, Uyghurs, Hong Kong, Taiwan. There are a group of really tough issues. And I think those have been sharpened rather than dulled over the course of the last months. So I think and now China is fooling around with Russia in an evil, unprovoked, disgraceful moment of very personal, venal execution of orders by Putin that have no place in the world in 2022 after all the lessons we learned in World War II. Worse than Joseph Stalin and equal to perhaps Hitler and the gross, grotesque crimes against humanity that are occurring. And China is not saying anything about it. China abstained in the United Nations. China did not stand up and say this is unacceptable behavior. So there are real challenges, I think, going forward at this particular moment. And we'll have to see whether or not we can find a common ground on climate or not. We need to. The tragedy is, Max, if we don't find common ground with China and we don't work together with China on climate, we do not reach our goals. And one of those goals is to avoid the worst consequences of the climate crisis. The only way we avoid the worst climate crisis, the worst climate impacts, are by meeting the scientifically arrived at goal of reducing our emissions in the next 8 years by 45% minimum. We're targeting 50%. Canada, 50%. Japan, South Korea, 45 to 50. Europe, 55. But China's not lowering its emissions. China's going up in emissions. India's going up in emissions. Russia's going up in emissions. So we have a fundamental, profound challenge to bring those other countries to the table. And if we don't, I think it's going to be a very difficult time for everybody.
Thank you. Bringing us back a little closer to home, as you probably know, Secretary Kerry, Montana is proudly home to 8 federally recognized tribes. My next question is, what steps is the Biden administration taking to assess and address how the climate crisis mitigation efforts will uniquely impact communities of color, including Native and Indigenous communities and those living in poverty, not just within the United States, but around the world?
Well, thank you, Sam. It's a great question. The administration has taken great steps. In fact, the president has ordered that any and all plans with respect to climate must consider the question of equity, access, diversity, and respect for Indigenous peoples. And he has really reached out to build a coalition of folks who are going to respect that. It is a critical element of his plans. But I think the president is also recognizing that the United States must lead on many of these technologies that are critical to winning this fight. because that's the way we're going to create employment opportunity for a lot of these folks. And that's the way our economy is going to do best. If we are making the transition to the new energy economy, there are millions of jobs to be created, and he will, I think, bend over backwards to make sure, not I think, I know, he has issued instructions to the entire cabinet that this must be a just and fair transition with nobody left behind. And that is at the forefront of all the policies he's pursuing, and some of the money that he's seeking from Congress is geared to go to that initiative.
Thank you. Max, do you have anything?
John, people need hope. News is not as encouraging as people would like. And this is your calling. So what hope do we have? What hope do you have? What examples do you have where you can say, hey, we're doing this, everybody, and we're making a little headway here, make a little progress there. We're doing that. They'll have, if there's a couple, 3 things that people can hang their hat on. It's, especially like our youth. There's idealistic, they want to do what's right. And it's helpful if we could find some things they can hang their hat on, say, you bet, we can do this.
So I've described the challenge, and your question is 1000% appropriate. And I've been waiting for it because I don't want people to feel, oh my God, this is just, sheer downhill. It's not. The reason I'm doing this job is because I believe we can win the battle. We just can't win it if we're ignoring it, if we're playing games with it. We can win it by moving more rapidly to do the things we know we need to do. But I'm excited. I actually see things happening that tell me it's not going to be government that solves this problem. It's going to be the private sector. And there are $1 trillion right now in venture capital going into the new technologies that we need to win the battle. I went to Stanford the other day, alma mater, and Max, I saw unbelievable things that are being developed in terms of direct carbon capture right out of the atmosphere. Capture the carbon, use the carbon, make something out of it. And this was it. And on Google X, I saw a number of potential ways in which carbon is going to be put to use and captured. I met with about 15 new startups, many of whom are doing really exciting things in terms of lithium and what it'll take to make batteries, how we're going to be ahead of the curve. I saw a 100-hour battery, storage for 100 hours of electricity. That's a game changer. If we can commercialize that and get it to scale, put it out in the marketplace, that's going to change the whole balance, because then solar and wind can be balanced for your base load demands for when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. And if you get several days of storage, you've got the ability with artificial intelligence to move energy all around the country to different places at different times. So when it's sunny in California, which is usually, and it's not sunny in Montana or elsewhere, you could send energy from one place to the other. But we have to break the log jam to make these things happen. We have to build the transition lines. We have to create a grid for America where we have the ability to apply the artificial intelligence that we've helped create. So I'm excited. Green hydrogen. There's a huge amount of money chasing after green hydrogen now. There are a lot of possibilities for electric vehicles have made unbelievable gains. President Biden has set a goal that by 2035, we're going to have only electric vehicles in the United States of America. Ford Motor Company and GM have spent hundreds of millions of dollars retooling their factory plants. They're buying in. They're going there. They will produce those vehicles. So in the president's legislation, he's creating a capacity to build out 500,000 charging stations around America. So everyone has confidence that if you have an electric car, you can get where you're going without interruption, recharge quickly, and be comfortable in it. So I am convinced, Max, that what we're asking people to do is not give up lifestyle, but to change the way in which they're providing for their current lifestyle. That's new energy, energy from different sources, clean energy. And the benefits of that are extraordinary. So I really see a bright future if we will do the things with the current technologies we have, wind and solar, geothermal, hydro, nuclear, and with the technologies we're creating, which will come online. I have no doubt about it. There's so much money going into chasing these things now. We're going to see profound changes in our economy, not unlike really the Industrial Revolution. This will be probably bigger than the Industrial Revolution because it's the largest market the world has ever known, with 4.5 to 5 billion users today. It's a multi-trillion-dollar market today, and it's going to go up to 9 to 10 billion users in the next 30 years. We can win this battle if we will simply summon the political will to make smart choices over these next few years.
I agree with you. America's resilient. We're a resilient country by far more than any other. And, the necessities and motherhood of invention. People are going to find new ways to do things, new technologies, and make it a buck doing it. I feel very good about that.
So this is actually a great segue. So no offense, Secretary Kerry or Ambassador Baucus, but we're not young people. I don't mean to break it to you, but we actually have a young person.
Speak for yourself.
Well, okay. I mean, I'm younger than you. We have a young person. Remember I mentioned that winning Sentinel team? Well, we have the team in the audience, and Izzy Watson has a question for you. So Izzy, please approach the microphone and ask your question.
Hi. So do you think that more progress needs to be made in convincing your generation versus my generation to take more action in combating climate change?
Yes.
I think she wants you to pick, Secretary Kerry.
I think your generation is already motivated. I think you're an exciting generation, and we can't do it without you. I mean, the bottom line is, we need everybody on board in this. Back when Max and I were a little younger and first getting into politics back in the late 1960s and early 70s, I became involved in something called Earth Day, which is tomorrow. And we organized and brought 20 million Americans out of their homes to demonstrate. Most of them were young folks, most of them driven from college. And we translated that one day event into a political process. We targeted the 12 worst votes in the United States Congress, labeled them the dirty dozen, 12 worst environment votes, labeled them the dirty dozen. And in the next election, 7 of the 12 lost their seats. That was the moment that the Clean Air Act passed, the Safe Drinking Water, the Marine Mammal Protection, the Coastal Zone Management, the Endangered Species. And that's when Richard Nixon was forced to sign into law the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, which we didn't have till then. All of that came out of citizen action, citizen demand, activism. And most of it was young people, the same young people who drove the peace movement, the women's movement, the civil rights movement, and it all changed lives for the better. Did it complete the task? No. But that's what we have to get back to. Nobody, I think, has the luxury of saying someone else can do it. We've all got to do it. And we got to fight for our democracy right now in a big way.
Thank you.
Max, do you have thoughts on that?
No. Although I'll say this is way off subject here a little bit. John, you might be interested. Today I was reading the Financial Times. I just ran across, you may have seen it. In today's paper, they have a fantastic app. It's a game on how you reduce greenhouse gases to zero emissions by the year 2050. It's a wonderful game, and I strongly encourage anybody who's interested in addressing climate to look at this application. It gives you all kinds of ideas on how to be successful. It's very educational. It's very educational. And a plug for the Financial Times for doing this, because it's excellent.
Let me add to what Max just said. You go to a site called En-ROADS, ROADS, En-ROADS at MIT, and there's a model, and you put in your assumptions. All the menu is there. Choose your assumption of what you want to do, and it'll show you how much you reduce emissions and how you get to net zero by 2050. It's a really spectacular app. So I urge you to do that.
John, what's it called?
En-ROADS, the letter N, Roads, ROADS.
Thank you.
And it's MIT. It's an MIT model. Just put in MIT En-ROADS model.
Good. Thank you.
So I want to go off script a little bit again, Secretary Kerry, because when you were doing your list of renewable resources or non-fossil resources, I couldn't help but hear nuclear or nukes as part of that. And that just made me curious as to there's a lot of discussion, as you well know, about the role of nukes going forward, given the climate crisis and what role they can and should play in the climate and energy future. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I personally believe that we can't get to net zero and we can't reach our target for 2030 without some component of nuclear involved in it. 20% of the power we have in Massachusetts today comes from nuclear. I think about 20% in California and elsewhere. So it's part of our mix today. And Germany has decided to get rid of its nuclear. It's a real problem. They have to buy power from France. They don't have the ability to fill their entire, but they made a decision that they're not going to have nuclear. I respect that. But Bill Gates is currently building in Wyoming a prototype nuclear plant, which he's half funding himself. I think the government's doing another half of the funding. And it's a new design which addresses questions of proliferation, questions of waste, questions of safety. And if these pan out, if the there's a whole small modular reactor, SMR, examination that's taking place. At MIT today, I heard discussion about this nuclear battery, which isolated, it's like a container-sized battery, not that dissimilar to ships we have in the Navy, which have run nuclear plants for 80 years. And we've never lost a sailor. We've never had an accident, never had a spill, never had a meltdown. So I think there are ways in modern technology to perhaps manage this. And it is zero emissions, folks, zero emissions. So if we're in a battle to win this fight, I think that it may be conceivable that it will pan out, that the expense issue and other issues are resolved over a period of time. I don't eliminate it. It's certainly one of the things I think we have to look at very closely in the very tough race that we're involved in.
Thank you. Next question. Can fossil fuel companies be incentivized to seriously develop clean energy, or should the focus be on supporting startup companies?
No, of course, but fossil fuel companies, I've been asked that question by a fossil fuel company. What do you think we ought to be? And I said, you ought to be an energy company. An energy company. You provide energy. And if your energy is provided in a way that doesn't make the problem worse, i.e. you're not spewing your fumes into the atmosphere, but you're capturing your emissions, go for it. That's your choice. If the marketplace says that's affordable and that's competitive in price, the market will decide. I don't think we have to pick a winner or chooser there. But I don't think the energy companies ought to be sitting there saying the only thing they can do is gas or oil. Now, the minute you do gas, you've got a 50% reduction in emissions if it's unabated. That's because gas doesn't produce as many emissions as oil or coal. So, up until this moment in time, the marketplace had already made that decision. Now, because of Ukraine, because of the effort to supplant the fuel for Europe, partly from the United States through LNG shipments and otherwise, there's been some rethinking about that a little bit. But we still, folks, are governed by the science. This is not a political issue in the sense that President Biden should sit there and make a political decision. He's making decisions based on two things, mathematics and physics. It's the science that's telling us what we have to do. The science does not differentiate between emissions from Europe or emissions from America or emissions from Russia or China. It's all what goes up in the atmosphere. It's the total amount of CO2 in the atmosphere that matters to us. And right now, even if we got to net zero by 2050, folks, we're going to have to suck billions of tons of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere to prevent future damage. So we've got to really be smart in listening to the science.
I have a question, John, about adaptive technologies. You know, the university here is spending some time trying to develop adaptive technologies. Your thoughts, because some would say, gee, well, that takes the eye off the ball in prevention. We got to prevent. What do you think the role is for adaptive technologies?
There's a big role for adaptation. And in fact, in Glasgow, countries decided to double the amount of money going into adaptation. So I think we have to do both. We have to do adaptation, we have to do mitigation. The one thing I don't want to lose sight of, though, Max, is doing enough mitigation, because everything you don't do to mitigate, you're going to have to spend more to adapt or build resilience.
True.
So mitigation to me remains the top priority by far. That's how you avoid the worst consequences of the crisis.
Speaking of COP26, Secretary Kerry, can you talk about the global methane pledge and why that's so important?
Yeah, and when you're answering that, you keep in mind a lot of farmers and ranchers are concerned about methane.
Yeah. No, I know that. I understand that, Max. I'm very tuned in. We, believe it or not, even in little old Massachusetts, we got a bunch of farms and farmers, cattle and so forth. Not like you do in Montana, but we got a lot of farmers, and it's a concern among farmers everywhere. The fact is that fascinating research is being done into the diet of cattle and pigs, hogs, and so forth. And there's a seaweed called asparagosis, which has been fed to cattle, which totally eliminates methane. There's a lot of other dietary work being done in various universities and laboratories around America to look at this question of agriculture. There's also, you know, Tom Vilsack, whom you know, Max, and appreciate, is now in his third term as agriculture secretary. He was governor of Iowa. He knows ag really, really well. And Tom will tell you that there's a lot that can be done in terms of regenerative agriculture, of no-till, low-till farming. I mean, different ways in which to preserve soil, to not release carbon dioxide, actually maximize the degree to which the nature becomes part of the solution, nature-based solutions. And so I'm quite confident that agriculture will continue, we will thrive on it, America will be a leader, and we will do it in a way that is going to develop through technology and other practices to be smart for the long term and sustainable. And I think, you know, a lot of things will happen. I mean, we're driving big vehicles on electric, on batteries. And I think more and more farm equipment may find that it can be electric, very high powered, very high torque, very capable of delivering the kind of power you need. The Ford 150 that Ford's now putting out, the most popular truck in America, I think the backup on the Ford 150 electric is about 2 years or something. People love it. It's powerful. It's got longevity in the mileage. And it's fully competitive with its younger brothers and sisters.
Just about out of time, Secretary Kerry, and I want to end on hopefully a positive note, as positive as it can get. The question we got from a lot of folks is, what are reasons for hope? The clock is ticking. It can feel impossible. You're in this fight. You've been in this fight for a long time, Secretary Kerry. I'm sure you get discouraged, but what keeps you going? What makes you hopeful?
The fact that we can win the fight. I mean, we can win the fight. This is not impossible. Remember, President Kennedy said that, you know, most of the problems on the planet are human induced, human created. I mean, but for earthquakes and volcanoes or whatever, tidal wave, I mean, that's true. Most of it emanates from the choices we make as human beings. And the fact is that therefore, President Kennedy reminded us also that that's what gave him hope, is that human beings can solve the problems. We can. We know what many of the solutions are. I mean, if you're digging a hole, the old practice is stop digging. That's the first step to getting out of it. And it seems to me that we got to stop digging the hole, which is relying on dirty sources of energy. And if those dirty sources can be cleaned, then they're no longer, I mean, dirty, you can use them. I'm not in the school of thought that says automatically you got to get rid of, one fuel or another simply because it came out of the ground. It's the emissions that are the problem. And if we can deal with the emissions, we can deal with the problem. But there are better choices. Solar today is much cheaper, folks. You can get down to 2.9, 2 cents, 3 cents a kilowatt hour for solar power today. And the big question mark for solar is what happens if the sun isn't shining? But if you have battery storage that's long enough, that problem gets solved. That's going to be a game changer. Wind power, we're seeing wind turbines become bigger and bigger, megawattage being produced from one turbine. That's going to be a major part of the long-term future. Geothermal is, and so obviously will be whatever the new technologies, green hydrogen or otherwise. I'm not just hopeful. I absolutely know we will get to a low carbon, zero carbon economy. We will get there, folks. It's inevitable. But the issue for all of us is, will we get there soon enough to avoid the worst consequences that scientists have predicted? For people with money, for states that are in certain places, that may not be a problem. But for people on the coastlines and people where the heat becomes intolerable and people where the water dries up and the rain systems change and so forth, that can become a major challenge. So I think that the real fight here is to get people to say, yes, let's take the action we can take today, knowing that that preserves the option for us to meet the standard the science says we have to meet by 2050. You want to get net zero by 2050, you've got to reduce enough between 2020 and 2030. And that's what we have to do. I think the fact that we can do it should be exciting to everybody. And the trick is going out and doing it.
You know, John, as I listen to you, we are incredibly lucky to have you working for us to address climate. I don't know anybody who knows this subject better than you. It's clear from tonight, you know this in and out. Second, I don't know anybody has the passion you have and the energy you have to get this job done. Clearly, it's all of us. It's not just you, but you are a tremendous inspiration. Your energy, passion, and knowledge is in of itself gives a lot of us, including myself, hope that hey, we're going to find a way to get this thing done. But just thank you so much, John, for joining us and for doing all that you're doing. It's wonderful.
Max, thank you. Thank you very much.
Let me just quickly add, and I want to add this on behalf of our partner for tonight's program, the Montana World Affairs Council, and their wonderful director, Chris Islip, who is responsible, frankly, for all these wonderful young people in the room. Thank you all for coming. Secretary Kerry, we're honored by your presence and your wisdom. Thank you for joining us. Yeah. And take care and keep fighting the good fight.
Thank you very much. Max, thanks so much. Great to be with you. My best to Mel. Big hug. Bye-bye.
Best to Therese.
Thank you.
Best to Therese.
That's it. That's all, folks. Thank you.
Forgot to mention, we have the same birthday every
You do?
we